Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of Beat Teacher Burnout. We have Dr Adam McCartney back with us today for a second go because he shared such wisdom from a different angle. So rather than having a head teacher or a teacher CEO on today, Adam has his educational psychology hat on and he supports school in a bit of a different way. And we've been talking today about the silent stress that goes on in school and whether it is an epidemic and how we can start talking about it and also bringing solutions. So that is our target for today, just a small target. Adam, would you like to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about what you're hoping to get today, what you're hoping to share today?
Thank you for having me back on, first off. Yeah, so obviously, like you said, I'm an educational psychologist and I've been in private practice for about 4 years. And with that comes the liberty to support teachers in the way that I see best fit. And what I'm hoping to get from today or talk about today is how to support those systems from a leadership down to really not only just avoid burnout, but to help teachers thrive in their roles in a very challenging environment. We see at the moment, although we've had an increase in pay, the resources are actually being cut. The people are being made redundant, particularly teaching assistants. And it's being felt not only at the child level, but the burden being put on teachers around what they're expected to deliver. And they have less time for things like CPD, peer collaboration. All those things are now starting to have an impact on the profession, and we need to do something about it.
Okay, so let's just dive in. What would be your first and favorite thing that you would suggest to a struggling school that is very stressed and sort of running on survival? And how would you do that?
When I support schools around this, it always nearly comes back to what is the vision, what is the mission statement, so to speak, if you want to get into business terms. And that usually means that I have to spend a bit of time with leadership. The reason that's important is I'll go into a bit of psychological background here. There's a couple of theories that really interact. The first being game theory, which people often use in terms of business decision making or gambling, but it actually has its applications in education too. And game theory is that people will act in a selfish way when given a choice because they don't realize that they are impeding on someone else. So the prisoner dilemma is the classic one, whereby you can have your sentence reduced if you both pick the same medium option, but if one of you tries to have the selfish option and get off scot-free, everybody gets the worst outcome. And when you don't have a clear vision, that likely happens. However, in 2007, Joe Rose wrote something called Collective Preferences. And what Joe found out was that when you make your vision statement or the shared goal very clear, people actually work collaboratively and they work in tandem with each other without needing to check in with each other. So say, for example, your vision statement was around inclusion and you had that written down, it was reiterated in all your team meetings. People tend to behave around that statement because it becomes this artifact, this talking point within the culture, and people don't deviate away from it because they know that's core to the culture. And if they do deviate away from it, it becomes a point of shame rather than an opportunity. So you're actually moving away from game theory and moving towards this collaborative process. And that's one of the biggest difficulties about being a school leader, is figuring out not only what you're about as a practitioner, but what is your setting trying to achieve? And is that achievement, is what you're trying to achieve set in reality? What I mean by that is, do you understand your community? Do you understand the demographics you're working with? Do you understand where you're at a space and time, whether that's attainment, whether that's skill set on the ground? You know, you can have aspirations, but if you want to go from 0 to 100 and you expect your teachers to be all performing, all singing, all dancing overnight, that vision statement isn't coming true. So you have to really have an objective lens. And part of my role is finding that lens.
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so are we talking about ownership here?
In a way, yes, we are from the top down. You can say that it's, the teaching profession expects X, Y, and Z, but really you got to be thinking about it within your school community. Where is that teacher at? Do they need extra training? Do they need extra support? Do they need to understand your vision statement better? And that's the ownership element that you're alluding to.
So I guess how if you've got a vision statement in your school, how do you bring your team to own it? How do you bring them along with you?
This is where communities of practice is a very good model. So communities of practice says that we have our shared domains, and within those shared domains, we have our community. And within our community, we have our tools. So our tools are what we use every day. Our community is who we're around. Who do we trust? Who do we have relationships with? And they set the culture as to what is the purpose of it. And the domain is what are we working towards? If you're in a school that is very aspirational and everybody's on board with that, so all your tools are geared around, say it's high SAT scores or SATs, maybe it is high GCSE results, and everything is geared around that. You're trying to basically be a grammar school. However, you have to then look at the entirety of the community. Is there going to be a tension point within that? Most likely, there's going to be an element of SEN that is going to question that shared goal. Then it doesn't become a shared goal anymore, because unless you can get that SEN demographic in line with that goal needs to reshape itself. And perhaps it becomes aspirational for every single student rather than the whole school. So we're trying to get the best for every individual student. And that might be a case of looking at passing grades rather than A stars. That's just one example of it. Yeah. And within that community element of how do teachers get the chance to relate to each other? Do they get the chance to collaborate? Do they get to talk about their practice? These things are important because when you enter a profession, your identity automatically starts to change. Okay. Whether you want it to or not, we all have our identities, and how we interact with other people affects our identity. The example I always give was I grew up in the island of Ireland. I didn't care about being Irish until I moved to England, because suddenly I was faced with this identity challenge because I came from a different community, a different culture. So when you enter the teaching profession, it's the same thing. When you start out, you're on the fringes of that community. You don't know the tools, you don't know the community, you don't know the practice well enough. So you have to start interacting with the people within it. If you have a vision within your school community, it's very clear. Suddenly, that community becomes much more mobilized, much more up for it. The practice becomes clear because everybody knows what they're going towards. If they're all going towards, we're trying to get every student across the line in terms of 5 GCSEs, then you start to see, okay, we're not just looking at those high achievers. What's it the ones who are struggling to get across? What inclusive practices do we have? What practices do we use within the classroom to get those students who struggle to engage over the line, so to speak? And that has a very different conversation to we're high aspirational, because you're just looking at one end of the demographic rather than the other end. And these are difficult conversations they have within schools, because the legislation and the paperwork and all the green papers, white papers, whatever you read, is all about every student. But how that manifests isn't the same in every school. So how do we go about having those difficult conversations?
Okay, so we've got two things I want to ask you about in there. The first one is identity, and the second is difficult conversations. So can I sort of backtrack a little bit and talk about identity for school staff? Because when I burnt out, I crashed physically, but I think there was such, having had to leave my role that I loved, I suddenly didn't know who I was. And I guess there's a very unhealthy identity some of us put on ourselves, that our role becomes our identity because we spend so many hours doing that that we get lost in it, which in itself isn't healthy, is it?
No. No, and that's the thing why extracurricular stuff outside of your profession is important too. And I really sympathize with you now. When I wake up, I live and breathe psychology. If someone said to me I had to stop doing this, I'd really struggle. To the point where I think me and my wife, when we had our son, we had a very serious talk about who was going to continue working and who was going to start taking the time off. And I started to envisage myself taking the time off, and it was hard for me. Thankfully, she didn't like her job as much as I liked mine. Um, but you're right in the sense that when you leave that role, it does affect your identity because you've entered that community. You've built relationships within that, and that has suddenly been taken away from you. And the thing it probably doesn't get spoken on enough about is that communities create connections. So you've had connections within that community, and then suddenly those connections either change meaning or taken away. Given the fact that you burned out, I'd imagine they were taken away because you had to take yourself out of that system. And that means you have no connection. You have limited connection. Maybe you've only got your immediate family or sometimes extended family around you, and that has a different experience. And then you enter into a new way of life. We have to create new forms of meaning, and you essentially starting from scratch. It's a bit like being the new teacher on the block in a different setting. You've got to figure out, who am I around? What are we working towards? How do I build meaning within this new environment or this new life that I'm embarking on? And any change to identity is automatically an attack on your mental health. Now, most changes in identity lead to better results. For example, the example I give of moving to England allowed me to explore different ways of becoming a psychologist. I resolved that meaning crisis, and now I have quite a happy life. But there was a point where that was tricky. Just like for you, leaving the profession would have meant that you had to create new meaning, which is in the hardest way possible. It is an attack on your identity, the meaning you give around your life. And people don't talk enough about that when it comes to mental health. It's usually symptomatic, not about how we create the meaning around those symptoms.
Hello, I'm Rowena Hicks, and I'm so pleased to introduce this course to you. It's a short, practical, made to fit into your current routine course that I hope is going to help you, because I know time is precious. Staff are frazzled at the end of the day, but actually this fits into what you're doing already. So why me? Why this? Well, I burnt out after 30 years in school as a teacher, a Senko, a specialist teacher, even an advisor, and then a leader. I burnt out. I loved it. I was passionate, but I had to leave. And that just breaks my heart. Teachers are leaving and they're going off sick. This has to stop. So what I've designed is 5 minutes at the start of each staff meeting. You can give your team something small and powerful to build momentum. You'll build their confidence. You'll improve their well-being, their team dynamics, their energy. You reduce stress and overwhelm. And you're building habits to increase productivity, energy, and joy. So each week, there is a short action sheet, because really there isn't going to be any change without action, is there? But there's no extra cost. You're going to be consistently investing in time together to shift how staff feel. Are they seen? Are they valued? Are they heard? Give them a voice. These are small microculture changes. You're going to be building your staff team, and you're going to enable them to thrive. This isn't a well-being bolt-on. It's a culture shifting tool built for real schools by someone who's really walked it. So let's stop staff from leaving, and let's help them to flourish and thrive in their roles. I guess, would you be able to give advice to people who are in the role and want to stay in their role in school about how to have a healthy identity? Because I talk about it in a very everyday person perspective of saying, for example, where do you come on your to-do list? Are you, is your family and yourself even near the top of your to-do list, or actually is it school, 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 and right down the bottom have you got your kids and yourself? Or how would you say it from your perspective?
The thing I always say about education is that it's run on goodwill. It's not a well funded system, but it is core to society. And I think educators know that. Without their input, many things in society would not function. You wouldn't have the next generation of doctors. You wouldn't have the next generation of engineers. Your law and order would be in chaos because education is actually quite a protective factor for many people. And so there is that sense of duty. And when you're on that front line in terms of nurturing the next generation, that sense of duty can be overwhelming. And I know for you, it probably was, given the stories that you've shared on this podcast. The important thing to remember is that line that it's a job, it is a vocation in a way, but you are a person. You're a person in that society that you're creating. You're not the gatekeeper for everything. And the system has to function without you as well. So, although you're an important part of that system, if you're operating within a system that you know would fall apart without your input, then something is wrong. You need to take that step back and speak to, whether that's leadership, whether that's yourself, or whether that's, if you're in secondary schools, that's within your immediate department. There has to be a way of making the system function without you. And the key way to do that is having an open and honest conversation, either with yourself or with your colleagues. What is our role? What is the core aspects of our job? Now, we have different definitions of what's important within teaching. For me, the core aspect of teaching is building relationships with students so that they find us trusting. For other people, it's about curriculum delivery. You have to resolve that in yourself and make sure that you understand the core of that and communicate that out. So if that's the case of, we identify as teachers, but we see our core role as nurturing these students so that they feel safe within the school environment. That's core number one. Second to that is curriculum delivery. So when we get pressure around curriculum delivery, as a team, we're going to push back on that if the students don't feel safe in our presence. And that can only happen at a group level. You can't do that at an individual level because you become marginalized. So about having those conversations with your colleagues about, what are we about? I think the last time I was on here, we spoke about the importance of reflective practice. This is another element of that. It's reflecting on the role of teaching and coming to some uncomfortable but important conclusions.
Yeah, I love that. And I love it because in my new course that's just come out, one of the weeks we talk about, where do you fit in your team and what do you contribute to your team? And have you ever thought about that? And actually, I challenged them at the end of that week to look at, this week, what about if you meet with your team and you don't talk about displays or data or planning, but you actually talk about yourselves and finding out a bit more about each other, and so that you build those relationships, because the research is showing that if those relationships are really strong in your team, you're much more likely, as the adult, as the teacher, to be thriving, and therefore you're going to be more creative and you're going to be able to have the better relationships with the pupils, and so the knock on goes on.
Mm-hmm. And once you have those relationships with the pupils, they'll probably start helping you plan the lesson. Oh, miss, you can't put that in because Jimmy won't know what you're talking about. So do this instead.
Yeah, I love that. What a great idea. Adam, I do want to make sure that we have a bit of time to talk about empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell people what work you're doing around that at the moment?
Yeah. So within my psychologically informed management systems model, whereby I go into schools and I give assessments to children and systems. So I'm either working with a problem a school has that's at a group level, or I'm working with individual cases. I always have an element whereby I sit down with either the Senko or the head teacher and say, look, these are the needs that are coming out. And I want to explore the systems by which these needs show themselves within your school. And a key element of that is how empowered do teachers feel and teaching assistants, because the two go hand in hand. And the model is, it's a triangular model. So if you imagine at the top you have control, then you have identity and role. So this kind of builds on what our previous conversation just now. But for head teachers, the thing to keep in mind is the autonomy parts. Control is just another word for autonomy. How autonomous do my staff feel? Can they act without my direct input? So remember what I was saying about, like, you need to create a system whereby if you suddenly left, the system still operates. Head teachers are the same. So one of the schools I supported, the head teacher was too involved in pastoral care. Now, for good reasons, they were doing their best for the students. But when I came in, I said, look, you are the head teacher. You are the vision setter. You are the person who makes sure the systems are operational. When you're off sick, what happens? This child, the one I was in seeing, usually it goes bad. Yeah. And I said, so that child's over-reliant on you. The system doesn't operate unless you're fulfilling that pastoral role, which means you can't fill your headship role. So do your staff feel autonomous when you're gone? The hard answer was no, they don't. They need me on site. They need me to bounce ideas off. They need me to answer the direct questions. It's like, okay, what are you going to do to give them that control? And we had a long conversation around it. And it was having, again, difficult conversations around role. They had some pastoral members of staff who, some were very keen to take on more responsibilities. Some were very keen not to take on responsibilities. But I said, you got to think about the system, not the individuals. How do you get these roles fulfilled so that the system operates without your direct input and them fulfilling their role? And that meant that they then had, like you had, the attack on identity. So identity is how you see yourself. If your sense of self is different from your defined role, you have an issue. So how do you resolve that? And a lot of that is down to good supervision. So the head teacher would sit with them, validate their concerns in the sense that, yes, I am asking you to take on a different role than you have been doing, but here's the reasons why. And then they give the clear message. This is what we're working towards. The system isn't operating well for these students. We need to focus more on our pastoral support throughout the system so that not only am I not going to burn out his head, but you'll be in a better position to control the problems that you're experiencing that you regularly bring to me. The teachers will feel more empowered as well because they will know the systems in place by which they support that student. And so it continues. So by looking at those roles and looking at the autonomy within those systems, we were able to create a much more, much more functional support network that wasn't over reliant on one person, but yet that child's needs were still met.
Okay, so if someone's listening to this and they're saying, that's my school, the head is so controlling, we have no autonomy, what would you be saying to those people?
The teachers or the head?
Yeah,
The
no,
teachers.
to the teachers.
It's a difficult conversation. A lot of these things are difficult conversations because where there's tension, there's uncomfortableness, and you have to have it. What I wouldn't be saying to him is that you need to go and talk to the head on your own, because depending on the temperament of that head teacher, that person could become marginalized and they could make life quite difficult. I would get them to speak with their colleagues first to see if their feelings, their tensions that they're experiencing are felt throughout the system. And if they are felt, then it's about approaching a member of the senior leadership team to see if what's the best way to raise this with the head teacher. Is it a case you go directly to them? Is it a case that you schedule a meeting and raise some questions? Is it a case that there's a particular child that you want to talk about, which by you explore these issues through that tension point, but it has to be raised in some way or other. And that teacher needs to think about, who are my key allies first? And I need to check out my thinking with them. So because going back to that community of practice model that I told you about, if you find that the practice that you're experiencing isn't felt by others, there's something, you might not fit that system and you need to go get a different job, or it might be that you need to adapt your practice because you're missing something key within the tool set that's available with that community.
Okay. Can you give us an example of, because I'm sure there are heads listening to this and they're thinking, oh, we might bring Adam in to help us if they have the self-awareness to recognize that that might be them. But could you give us and by the way, that's not meant as a judgment, because we're all learning and we're all growing, aren't we? And we all need help and support to do better, be better. Can you give us an example of a story, an experience you've had where you've worked with a school and the head has supported others to maybe take ownership in some way, or
Yeah,
give us an
I do.
example?
So I was working with a school and I had a good relationship with the head teacher, and he shared with me that this teacher was given a tricky class at the beginning of the year, but his performance wasn't living up to it, and they were seriously considering performance review. Basically, his job was threatened, and the teacher was very enthusiastic. He wanted to learn, but there were certain key aspects of the role that he really struggled with. A lot of it was around structure. A lot of it was about getting the children to behave, essentially. And he had many times where the head teacher would go in model lessons, this deputy teacher, they had supervision or line management. All these different strategies were put in place. And I said to him, there's what's going on for him. Do you understand how he perceives the job? And he goes, what do you mean? The job is the job? I was like, well, it's a profession. Everybody interprets it slightly differently. And because he was so enthusiastic, he basically just wanted to help children. But he didn't quite know what was the point of why he was given this class. And I said, you have to have that chat with him. This class was particularly challenging around SEMH needs, social, emotional, mental health, for those who aren't familiar. And I said, you have to say to him, like, why was he given this class? What is the purpose of giving him this class? And what are the main practices that he has to take on board? And me and the head had a much deeper conversation, but essentially his lesson plans had to be much more structured, much more focused on sensory breaks, much more focused on emotional regulation, and the lesson inputs had to be short, sharp, little and often type things to keep this class motivated. And I said, and the other thing is, don't keep watching him. You give him the framework and you'll see the change in the behavior of the student yourself. And it was like deer in the headlights moment, because the head was like, what? I have to give up control. I was like, afraid so, because without that element of trust, that teacher is only going to try and emulate you. They're not going to take ownership of the framework you've given them and apply it within their own practice. If you do want some sort of check-in service, use your senior leaders. So there was a year 6 teacher who was very experienced on the senior leadership team. I says, get her to do check-ins, like maybe once a day at the end of the day. You don't need to do it. You come in for the formal review. And that teacher then became their strongest performer. He's now considered, like, well, I think informally, but when I go to see him, it's pretty good stuff. And he's definitely moved up. He's trusted amongst the community. They go to him for things around SEMH now. His opinion's valid. It's valued, not just valid, it's valued amongst the community. And he's thriving in the role. So he's gone from almost being sacked to one of their best teachers.
And that's from trust, from structure, from giving autonomy.
And I'd say leap of faith too. That teacher had to trust my judgment call on a system that wasn't mine to make that judgment call. So, and that goes to show you the power of the relationship between head teachers and support staff like myself, and the power that has within education.
But also the power of the relationship developing between the head teacher and the teacher, because the head teacher was saying, actually, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to give you the tools, but then I'm going to trust you to run with it. Wasn't he?
Yeah. And
So,
he wasn't neglectful, but he did put in support systems with senior leaders. But the important thing was that teacher did not feel like he was being watched by the head. He felt like I was trusted to deliver on this.
wow. Okay. That's an amazing story to finish with. Adam, I'm guessing there's going to be people listening to this who want to have a chat. So how can they find out about you, and what do you do really?
So I do two main things: training and consultations. So you can contact me either through my website, which is www.dradammccartney.com, or you can email me at hello@dradammccartney.com, or you can listen out for me in my podcast that I'm just launching with my associate Mike Lane, called Between Two Psychs. Psych spelled Psych, and we've just recorded our first episode on how to support students with neurodiversity. And if anybody is listening to this who would like to talk to me, please approach me. I'm always open to new conversations and making new connections. I feel like it was the theme of this episode. But yeah, I would be very keen to work with some head teachers.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Adam. I think that story at the end has slightly blown me away, because I'm just thinking there's a teacher there who was about to leave teaching, and because of your input, they are now thriving. I mean, how exciting is that? So yeah, I hope people get in contact with you and listen to your podcast. So
Thank
thanks,
you.
Adam, for being with us, and thanks everyone
Thank
for
you for having
listening.
me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.